I'm going to drop the kids off with you next week. You're not doing anything anyway, so you can watch them while we're in Bali. My daughter-in-law Connie's voice crackled through my ancient landline phone, the only reliable communication at my cabin. No, hello, no, how are you? Not even a question of whether I was available. Just an announcement, as if I were a convenient appliance she could switch on when needed. If you're watching, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and subscribe. Don't forget to hit like. I gazed out my window at the morning mist rising from the forest floor, at the pair of cardinals that had made their nest in the maple tree outside my kitchen, at the utter peace I had spent 40 years dreaming of and the past 6 months creating. Florence, did you hear me? Connie's impatient voice cut through my thoughts. Joe and I need this second honeymoon. It's only for 2 weeks, and the kids will be fine with you in that cabin. She said cabin, the way most people might say sewage treatment plant, with a mixture of distaste and superiority that had characterized our relationship since she'd married my son 15 years ago. There's no Wi-Fi here, I said mildly. No television either. The nearest town is 12 miles away. Perfect. Less screen time will be good for them. You're always saying that, right? Her false enthusiasm wasn't even trying to be convincing. Besides, you're a retired teacher. You'll figure something out to keep them occupied. I could have argued, could have reminded her that my retirement to this remote cabin in the Adirondacks after 40 years of teaching high school biology was precisely so I wouldn't have to figure out how to occupy children anymore. Could have mentioned that while I love my grandchildren, the twins Kevin and Kimberly were city kids through and through, and 15-year-old Candace had made it abundantly clear during Christmas that she found both nature and me excruciatingly boring. Instead, I smiled to myself, a plan already forming. Claro, I said, slipping into Portuguese, a language I'd learned during my teaching sabbatical in Brazil decades ago. When stressed, I sometimes revert to it, enjoying the melodious flow that English lacks. What? Connie asked. Sorry, I meant, of course. Yes, you can bring them next week. Great. We'll drop them off Monday morning. Our flight's at 3. The relief in her voice was palpable. Oh, and Florence? Pack away any weird science stuff you have around. You know how squeamish Kimberly gets about bugs and things? I glanced at my collection of preserved specimens, the pride of my teaching career donated to me upon retirement. Butterflies under glass, beetle specimens, and yes, several jars of various creatures suspended in formaldehyde that had fascinated generations of students. I'll make sure everything is appropriate, I replied, which wasn't exactly a promise to remove anything. After we hung up, I sat at my small kitchen table, cupping my tea with both hands. The solitude I'd so carefully constructed was about to be shattered by an 8-year-old boy who couldn't go 20 minutes without electronic entertainment, his twin sister who screamed at the sight of earthworms, and their teenage sister whose face I'd rarely seen without a phone in front of it. Yet rather than dread, I felt something unexpected stirring within me. The familiar strategic excitement I used to get before implementing a particularly challenging lesson plan with a difficult class. For 40 years, I'd taught teenagers who initially had zero interest in biology. By the end of each school year, I'd converted most of them into amateur naturalists who could identify local species and understand ecological connections. I hadn't lost my touch just because I'd traded a classroom for a cabin. Well, I said to the cardinal pair, now flitting about their nest. Looks like we're about to have company. I spent the next few days preparing, not by childproofing my cabin or hiding my scientific collections, but by crafting what might be the most important lesson plan of my career. From the storage shed, I retrieved the old fishing poles I'd bought at a yard sale but hadn't yet used. I dusted off field guides, magnifying glasses, and the telescope that had belonged to my late husband. I pulled out the watercolor set I'd been saving for the right moment, along with journals with handmade paper that I'd purchased from a local artisan. Then I hiked to specific locations around my property, noting the beaver dam that had created a small pond perfect for observing amphibians, the fox den I'd discovered last month, and the clearing where deer gathered at dawn. I marked small trails, subtle enough that they required genuine attention to follow, leading to these natural wonders. The day before their arrival, I baked, not cookies or brownies, but hearty multigrain bread that required kneading by hand and simple granola that needed careful stirring to toast evenly. Foods that involved process, patience, and participation. By Sunday evening, everything was ready. I sat on my porch rocker, watching fireflies begin their nightly display against the darkening trees. My cabin was small, just 2 bedrooms, a combined kitchen and living area, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub, and my screened porch. The twins would share the guest room. Candace would take the pull-out couch. It would be cramped, but that was part of the plan. During my teaching career, I'd learned that discomfort often precedes growth. Students who were pushed just beyond their comfort zones, not traumatically, but enough to disrupt complacency, were the ones who experienced the most profound development. My grandchildren had spent their entire lives cushioned by convenience, entertainment on demand, and parents who confused indulgence with affection. Connie's dismissive words echoed in my mind. "You're not doing anything anyway." It was a common misconception about retirement, especially from someone like Connie, who measured worth by productivity and status. She couldn't comprehend that my quiet days observing nature, reading, writing in my journal, and simply being present were not nothing. They were everything I'd worked 4 decades to achieve. But perhaps she'd inadvertently given me a gift. These 2 weeks were an opportunity to share what I valued with the next generation of my family. To show them that nature isn't merely a backdrop for selfies or an inconvenience to be controlled, but a complex, fascinating world that rewards patient attention. As darkness fell completely, the stars emerged in breathtaking clarity, free from city light pollution. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a celestial river, and I spotted 3 satellites tracking their silent paths among the constellations. "Let's see if you can resist this," I whispered to the night sky, imagining Candace's reaction to this view compared to her perpetually illuminated urban environment. I wasn't naive enough to think this would be easy. There would be complaints, resistance, probably even tears. But underneath their manufactured needs and electronic dependencies, my grandchildren were still curious humans with an innate connection to the natural world, even if it had been buried under layers of modern distraction. And I had 2 weeks to help them rediscover it. The lesson was prepared. Now I just needed my students to arrive. Monday morning arrived with a symphony of birdsong that I'd grown accustomed to but never tired of. The complex melodies of thrushes, the chattering of chickadees, the rhythmic drumming of a pileated woodpecker somewhere in the distance. I rose with the sun, as usual, savoring the quiet routine I'd established. Stretching exercises on the porch, a simple breakfast of oatmeal with fresh berries, then a walk to check my rain gauge and thermometer, recording the data in my weather journal as I'd done every day since moving to the cabin. These small rituals had become sacred to me, and I performed them with special appreciation, knowing they were about to be disrupted. By the time I heard the unmistakable sound of tires on my gravel driveway, too fast, kicking up dust clouds visible through the trees, I was centered and ready. My son Joe's SUV emerged from the tree line, gleaming and out of place against my rustic setting. It pulled up beside my weathered Subaru, and for a moment, no one emerged. I could imagine the scene inside, the final negotiations, bribes, and threats being issued to ensure good behavior during the handoff. Finally, the doors opened. Joe stepped out first, his business casual attire suggesting he'd head straight to the airport after dropping off the children. Despite living just 3 hours away, he visited rarely, always with an eye on his watch and phone. Today was no exception. He checked his smartwatch immediately upon exiting the vehicle. "Hi, Mom," he called, forcing cheerfulness. "Beautiful day up here." Before I could respond, Connie emerged from the passenger side, designer sunglasses perched on her carefully highlighted hair. She surveyed my cabin and the surrounding woods with thinly veiled dismay, as if reassessing the wisdom of leaving her children in such uncivilized conditions. The rear doors remained firmly shut. "Someone's going to have to physically remove them, I think," Joe said, with an awkward laugh, moving to open one of the back doors. Kevin tumbled out first, clutching a backpack that I suspected contained more electronics than clothing. At 8, he was all energy and noise under normal circumstances, but now he looked at my cabin with the wariness of someone approaching an alien spacecraft. "Is there really no Wi-Fi, Grandma Flo?" he asked, bypassing hello altogether. "Really no Wi-Fi," I confirmed. "But there's a fox den about a quarter mile that way, and I spotted bear tracks near the creek yesterday." His expression wavered between horror and reluctant interest at the mention of bears. Kimberly emerged next, a pink rolling suitcase in tow that was entirely impractical for my gravel pathways. She immediately slapped at her arm. "Something bit me already," she wailed. "That was a leaf that brushed against you, Kimmy," Joe said, patience already wearing thin. "Remember what we talked about? No dramatic scenes." Last, and with the most obvious reluctance, Candace exited the vehicle. At 15, she had perfected the art of communicating utter disdain with minimal effort. Her eyes remained locked on her phone as she stepped out, thumbs typing furiously as if racing to send final messages before entering a dead zone. Her oversized headphones remained clamped over her ears, creating both a physical and symbolic barrier between herself and the natural world. "Candace," Connie called sharply, "headphones off. Say hello to your grandmother." With exaggerated slowness, Candace pushed one side of her headphones back. "Hi, Grandma," she muttered, still not looking up from her phone. "Hello, Candace," I replied warmly. "Your cardinal friends are excited to meet you." This prompted her to glance up briefly, confusion momentarily replacing disinterest. Good. Confusion was a starting point, a crack in certainty through which curiosity might grow. Joe began unloading luggage while Connie handed me a folder. "Here's their schedules, medication information. Kimmy needs her allergy pill every morning, emergency contacts, and the name of the resort in Bali. We'll have limited phone service there, but the hotel can reach us in an emergency." I accepted the folder with a nod. "I'm sure we'll be fine. I've handled classrooms of 30 teenagers for decades. 3 children should be manageable." "These 3 can be a handful," Connie warned, lowering her voice. "Especially Candace. She's been difficult lately, moody. Her counselor says it's normal teenage development, but..." She trailed off, glancing at her eldest daughter who had wandered a few feet away, face still illuminated by her phone's glow. "Adolescence is a fascinating developmental stage," I said. "The brain is rewiring itself, creating new neural pathways while pruning others. It's actually quite similar to what happens in a forest after a disturbance. New growth emerging from what appears to be chaos." Connie blinked at me, clearly having expected commiseration rather than a biology lesson. "Right. Well, they've all had breakfast, but the twins will be hungry again soon. They're used to snacking regularly. Food will be available when it's prepared," I said pleasantly. "And they're welcome to pick berries when they're hungry between meals. The blackberries along the south path are particularly sweet right now." Another blink. "They don't really forage." "They will," I replied simply. The goodbye process was mercifully brief. Hugs were exchanged, last-minute instructions issued, and promises of good behavior extracted. As Joe and Connie prepared to leave, I noticed Candace's shoulders tense, a momentary flash of vulnerability beneath her carefully constructed indifference. Despite her protests about coming here, she was still a child watching her parents leave her behind. "We'll FaceTime you from the resort," Connie called as they climbed back into the SUV. "The landline doesn't support video calls," I reminded her, "but we can certainly speak by phone." Before she could process this limitation, Joe had the vehicle in reverse. With a spray of gravel and a chorus of "Love you, be good," they were gone, leaving a cloud of dust and 3 children staring after them with expressions ranging from uncertainty to outright panic. Silence descended, broken only by natural sounds, the breeze through pine needles, a woodpecker resuming its work, the distant gurgle of the creek. For children accustomed to constant electronic noise and stimulation, this relative quiet must have seemed deafening. Kevin was the first to break. "So what do we do now?" I smiled, pleased with this perfect opening. "Now," I said, picking up a well-worn knapsack from my porch, "we begin." "Begin what?" Kimberly asked suspiciously, still clutching her pink suitcase like a shield. "Our adventure, of course." I swung my knapsack over one shoulder. "First, let's get you settled inside, and then I have something special planned." The twins exchanged glances that spoke volumes, the nonverbal communication of siblings contemplating shared misfortune. Candace, meanwhile, had wandered toward the porch, her posture stiff as she held her phone skyward in the universal gesture of signal-seeking. "There's no reception here," I told her gently. "The mountains block most signals. There's a spot about 2 miles up the ridge where you can sometimes get 1 bar, but it comes and goes with the weather." Her response was a look of such genuine horror that I might have laughed if I hadn't recognized the true distress behind it. For a 15-year-old in 2023, being phoneless wasn't merely an inconvenience, it was an amputation. "How am I supposed to talk to my friends?" she demanded. How am I supposed to know what's happening? The same way humans did for thousands of years before smartphones, I replied. Through direct experience and conversation. You might find it refreshing. Her eye roll suggested she found this about as appealing as a root canal. Inside the cabin, the children's reactions to their temporary home were exactly as I'd anticipated. Kevin immediately searched for a television, there wasn't one, electrical outlets, limited, or any device that might provide entertainment. Kimberly wrinkled her nose at the rustic furniture and hand-woven rugs, declaring the entire place like something from a history museum. Candace examined the pull-out couch that would be her bed with open dismay, testing its firmness with one hand while still hopelessly clutching her useless phone with the other. I need to charge my phone, she announced. Even if there's no signal, I can still use my playlists and games. Of course, I said, gesturing to the single outlet in the living area. Though I should mention that we run on solar power here. After sundown, we conserve electricity for essential needs only, primarily lighting and refrigeration. This news was received with collective dismay. But my white noise app, Kimberly protested. I can't sleep without it. The creek behind the cabin provides excellent white noise, I assured her, much more authentic than any recording. While they absorbed this latest hardship, I busied myself preparing a light lunch. Fresh bread I'd baked yesterday, sliced vegetables from my garden, and herb-infused water in place of the sugary drinks they were undoubtedly accustomed to. I'm starving, Kevin announced, eyeing the spread with suspicion. Don't you have any chips? No chips, I said cheerfully, but this bread has seeds that provide much better sustained energy. Your body will thank you. My body wants Doritos, he muttered. But hunger won out over preference, and he cautiously tried the bread. Lunch proceeded with minimal conversation, each child lost in their own thoughts, primarily, I suspected, cataloging the many ways in which this rustic setting failed to meet their usual standards. Candace picked at her food, occasionally sighing dramatically to ensure we all registered her displeasure. So, I said as they finished eating, who's ready for our first expedition? Expedition? Kevin perked up slightly. Like a hike? More like an exploration, I corrected. We're going to visit the beaver pond. It's a half-mile walk, and this time of day, we might catch them working on their dam. Beavers? Kimberly's voice rose an octave. Aren't they dangerous? Not unless you're a tree, I assured her. They're actually fascinating creatures, nature's engineers. They transform entire ecosystems with their dams. I'm not going, Candace announced flatly. I'll stay here and read or something. She glanced around for the first time, noting the bookshelves lining one wall. You do have books, right? Several hundred, I confirmed, though many are field guides and scientific texts. I'm afraid there's nothing about teenage vampires or dystopian love triangles. Her eyebrows rose slightly, perhaps surprised that I knew enough about young adult literature to make the reference. Before she could respond, Kevin interrupted. Do we have to go? Can't we just, I don't know, play a game or something? I have many games, I said. Chess, backgammon, cards. But those are evening activities. Afternoons are for exploring while the light is good. I meant video games, Kevin clarified, with the exasperated tone of someone explaining the obvious. Ah, no, I don't have those. I began packing a small bag with water bottles, field glasses, and a first aid kit. The expedition begins in 15 minutes. Wear close-toed shoes and bring a hat if you have one. The sun can be intense in the clearings. I didn't pack hiking shoes, Kimberly protested. I brought my sandals and my sparkly flats for when we take pictures. Whatever shoes you have will be fine for today, I assured her. We'll figure out alternatives for tomorrow. As they reluctantly prepared, I could hear their whispered complaints and declarations of boredom. Candace remained adamant about staying behind, and after considering whether to insist, I decided to allow it. Forcing her would only reinforce her resistance. Better to let curiosity develop naturally. Exactly 15 minutes later, the twins and I set out along the narrow path leading to the beaver pond. Their initial reluctance gave way to cautious observation as I pointed out interesting features along the way. A fallen log transformed into a nursery for fungi, a series of woodpecker holes that told the story of insect infestations beneath the bark, delicate wildflowers with medicinal properties that indigenous people had used for centuries. This one, I said, indicating a small purple flower, was used to treat bee stings, and this moss can serve as a natural bandage in emergencies. Why would we have an emergency? Kimberly asked immediately, her anxiety flaring. We won't, I assured her. But isn't it fascinating to know how people survived before modern medicine? Kevin, despite his earlier resistance, began asking questions about animal tracks we encountered. His natural curiosity was emerging, just as I'd hoped. Even Kimberly, after her initial trepidation about insects, became absorbed in examining a spectacular spiderweb strung with dewdrops that caught the sunlight like diamonds. When we returned to the cabin 2 hours later, sweaty but animated by our discoveries, we found Candace exactly where we'd left her, curled on the couch, staring at her now dead phone. "You missed the beaver," Kevin informed her with newfound authority. "It slapped its tail on the water when it saw us. It was like a gunshot. Thrilling," Candace muttered, but I caught her glancing out the window with the first flicker of something other than disdain, perhaps wondering what else might be out there beyond the cabin walls. That evening, as I prepared a simple dinner of vegetable stew and cornbread, I observed the subtle shifts already occurring. The twins were arguing about what they'd seen at the pond, their voices excited rather than whiny. And Candace, though still determinedly aloof, had found my shelf of astronomy books and was quietly paging through one featuring spectacular nebula photographs. Day 1, I thought with satisfaction. Just 13 more to go. By day 3, a pattern had emerged. Mornings were met with renewed resistance, complaints about the firmness of beds, the simplicity of breakfast, oatmeal or eggs, never the sugared cereals they were accustomed to, and most persistently, the absence of electronic entertainment. Yet by afternoon, following whatever exploration I'd planned, this resistance softened into reluctant engagement. Kevin had developed a fascination with animal tracks, his natural competitiveness finding outlet in trying to identify signs before I could point them out. Kimberly, initially terrified of insects, now carefully transported spiders outside rather than shrieking for their extermination. Both twins had stopped asking about television by the second day, though they still occasionally mentioned video games with the wistfulness of remembering distant friends. Candace remained the holdout, refusing to join our expeditions and maintaining her posture of studied boredom. She'd taken to sitting on the porch with a book, ostensibly reading but often staring into the forest with an unreadable expression. Her phone battery had died on the first day, and though I'd shown her where she could charge it, the device's uselessness without signal had diminished its appeal. On the evening of the third day, after the twins had fallen asleep, exhausted from helping me transplant seedlings in the garden, I found Candace standing on the porch, looking upward. The night was clear, the moon a thin crescent that did little to diminish the dazzling canopy of stars. "It's incredible, isn't it?" I said quietly, joining her at the railing. No light pollution to obscure the view. She didn't answer immediately, her face titled upward, expression softer than I'd seen since her arrival. "I've never actually seen the Milky Way before," she finally admitted. "Not like this. In the city, you can barely see any stars at all. Would you like to see it through the telescope?" I offered. "Your grandfather's old celestron is quite powerful. You can make out Saturn's rings on clear nights like this." She hesitated, the automatic rejection visibly warring with genuine curiosity. "I guess," she said finally, affecting nonchalance, "it's not like there's anything else to do." I set up the telescope on the flat rock behind the cabin that served as my stargazing platform. Candace watched with poorly disguised interest as I aligned the scope, first finding the moon and then moving to Jupiter, its Galilean moons visible as tiny pinpricks of light. "Take a look," I invited, stepping aside. She approached cautiously, as if the telescope might bite, then bent to peer through the eyepiece. Her sharp intake of breath told me everything. "Those are actual moons?" she asked, her voice hushed with awe. "Like, not a picture?" "Not a picture," I confirmed. "That's direct light that's traveled millions of miles to reach your eye. You're seeing them in real time. Well, minus the light travel delay." She continued staring through the scope, making small adjustments to follow Jupiter's movement. "This is better than the pictures," she finally said. "There's something profound about a direct experience," I agreed. "No screen between you and the reality. No one else's filter or interpretation." We spent over an hour moving from celestial object to object, the Andromeda Galaxy, star clusters in Sagittarius, the reddish tint of Mars. Candace asked increasingly sophisticated questions, her adolescent facade of indifference crumbling under genuine wonder. "Did you and Grandpa come out here a lot?" she asked, as I showed her how to realign the telescope. When you were younger? Your grandfather was the one who taught me about the stars, I told her. On our first date, he brought a telescope much like this one to a field outside the college where we met. I was impressed by his knowledge, and he was a handsome devil in those days. This earned a small smile, the first real one I'd seen from her. Mom never talks about him, she said, or about what you guys were like when you were younger. Your mother didn't know your grandfather very well, I said carefully. He passed when your father was in college, and your parents didn't meet until several years later. But Dad doesn't talk about him either. Or about you, really. She glanced at me. No offense. None taken. Your father and we've had a complicated relationship since your grandfather died. Joe had to grow up quickly, take on responsibilities he wasn't quite ready for. Like what? I considered how much to share with a 15-year-old. Financial pressures, emotional burdens. His father was gone suddenly, and I was struggling with my own grief. Joe became very focused on security, on tangible achievements. Material success, Candace said with surprising perception. That's all they care about. The right address, the right schools, the right appearances. The bitterness in her voice revealed depths I hadn't fully appreciated. And that's not what you value? I asked gently. She shrugged, returning to the telescope to avoid eye contact. What's the point? You spend your whole life working for bigger houses and nicer cars, and then you're too busy working to actually live in the house or drive the car. The insight was startlingly mature, revealing a critical awareness of her parents' lifestyle I hadn't expected. There are many ways to measure a successful life, I told her. Material comfort is one metric, but there are others. Impact on the world around you, depth of relationships, knowledge gained and shared, joy experienced. She was quiet for a long moment, adjusting the telescope's focus. This is the kind of success you chose? This cabin? Being alone in the woods? This specific manifestation came after retirement, but yes, I chose a path that prioritized experience and impact over accumulation. I taught because it mattered, not because it made me wealthy. And you don't get lonely out here? All by yourself? Alone isn't the same as lonely, I explained. I have purposeful solitude, which is very different from isolation. And I'm part of a community. It's just that my community includes the ravens that nest in the tall pine, the family of foxes that den near the creek, and the changing seasons themselves. She glanced at me sideways, as if trying to determine whether I was being serious or merely poetic. Tomorrow, I said, changing the subject, I'm taking the twins to the waterfall. It's a more challenging hike than what we've done so far. You're welcome to join us. She hesitated, and I could see her weighing her cultivated disinterest against her growing curiosity about the natural world beyond the cabin. Maybe, she said finally, if I'm not doing anything else. Given that her options consisted primarily of reading my books or staring at her dead phone, this was practically an enthusiastic acceptance. I nodded, careful not to show too much satisfaction at this small victory. As we packed up the telescope, Candace paused, looking back at the star-filled sky. If we had come out here when I was younger, she said quietly, like when the twins were babies, maybe things would be different now. Different how? Just different. For all of us. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. But as we walked back to the cabin in companionable silence, I felt the first real connection forming between us, a fragile bridge across the generational divide that had seemed so insurmountable just days ago. The hike to the waterfall required genuine effort, a steady climb along a narrow trail that wound through dense forest before opening onto a rocky shelf overlooking a 60-foot cascade. I'd chosen it deliberately as the next challenge, sensing that the children were ready to push beyond the relative ease of our previous explorations. Surprisingly, all three joined the expedition. Candace appeared on the porch at the appointed time, wearing the hiking boots I'd left outside her door, old ones that had belonged to my daughter-in-law during a brief, forgotten phase when Connie had attempted to embrace outdoorsy activities to impress Joe during their courtship. They fit Candace well enough, and she'd paired them with practical jeans rather than the fashionable torn ones she'd arrived in. Those boots will serve you better than sneakers on the rocky sections, I said, acknowledging her choice without making too much of it. She shrugged. Whatever. I was bored anyway. The twins were less equipped for the journey, but children at 8 possess natural resilience that compensates for inadequate footwear. Kevin bounded ahead on the trail like an enthusiastic puppy, while Kimberly maintained a running commentary on every unusual plant or insect we encountered. Is that one poisonous? What about this one? Will that bite me? Can I touch this? Rather than answering each question directly, I'd begun encouraging her to consider the evidence herself. What do you notice about its coloring? Does it have warning patterns? Is it trying to hide or making itself obvious? By the third day, she'd started answering her own questions, building an intuitive understanding of which creatures presented actual threats versus harmless curiosities. Her initial fear was evolving into discriminating caution, a much more useful survival skill than generalized anxiety. The trail grew steeper as we approached the waterfall, requiring careful footing on sections where exposed tree roots and loose rocks created natural obstacles. I noted with approval that the children instinctively formed a supportive chain, with Kevin reaching back to help his twin over difficult spots, while Candace, surprisingly, kept a watchful eye on both younger siblings from the rear. When we finally emerged onto the rocky overlook, the payoff was immediate and dramatic. The waterfall thundered before us, sunlight catching in the spray to form dancing rainbows. Below, a clear pool invited swimming, its blue-green depth a startling contrast to the white foam where the cascade met water. "Whoa," Kevin breathed, his perpetual motion temporarily arrested by awe. "It's like something from a movie," Kimberly added, her voice hushed beneath the waterfall's roar. Candace said nothing, but she moved to the edge of the overlook, her face tilted to feel the spray on her skin, eyes closed in an expression of pure sensation. For that moment, she wasn't a posturing teenager, but simply a human being connecting with one of nature's most primal displays of power and beauty. I allowed them time to absorb the experience before unpacking our lunch, sandwiches made with bread we'd baked together yesterday, fresh fruit, and oatmeal cookies that the twins had helped mix and portion onto baking sheets. Simple food that tasted extraordinary in this setting, enhanced by the effort required to reach this spot. "Can we swim in it?" Kevin asked, eyeing the pool below with undisguised longing. "There's a path down," I confirmed. "But the water is mountain runoff, cold even in summer, and we'd need to check the pool depth carefully before diving." "I didn't bring a swimsuit," Kimberly pointed out. "Neither did I," Candace added. "Shorts and t-shirts work just fine for wilderness swimming," I told them. "They'll dry quickly in the sun, but swimming is optional. Just sitting by the pool with our feet in the water is magical too." The decision was unanimous. All three wanted to make the descent to the pool. The path required careful navigation, steeper than the main trail and slippery in spots from perpetual spray. I took the lead this time, demonstrating where to place feet and which rocks were stable enough to use as handholds. The children followed my example with careful attention, their movements becoming more confident as they developed a feel for the terrain. At the pool's edge, we removed shoes and socks, dangling feet in the crystalline water. It was indeed cold, eliciting squeals from the twins and a shocked gasp from Candace. "People pay for cold therapy like this in fancy spas," I told them, enjoying the numbing sensation around my ankles. "The cold triggers all sorts of interesting physiological responses, increased circulation when you warm up again, endorphin release. It feels like knives," Kimberly complained, but she didn't withdraw her feet. "Just wait," I advised. "In a minute, it stops feeling cold and starts feeling alive." Candace gave me a skeptical look, but as the initial shock faded, her expression changed to surprised pleasure. "It's tingling now," she admitted, "like carbonation on skin." Kevin, predictably, couldn't resist the call of full immersion. After securing my permission and verifying the depth was safe, he stripped down to his shorts and t-shirt and plunged in with a war whoop that echoed off the surrounding rocks. His initial shock, wide eyes and gasping breath, gave way to exhilarated laughter as he paddled around the pool. "It's awesome," he called to his sisters, "like being inside a soda." Kimberly, never one to be outdone by her twin, cautiously followed his example, though she lowered herself in gradually rather than diving. Her initial discomfort transformed into delight as she discovered she could float effortlessly in the clear water, the buoyancy compensating for her limited swimming skills. Candace observed her siblings with a mixture of amusement and longing, clearly torn between teenage dignity and the simple joy they were experiencing. "The water feels different on your whole body compared to just your feet," I told her. "More intense initially, but then remarkably freeing." She glanced at me, then at the twins splashing happily. "No one would see me here, would they?" she asked quietly. Like, there aren't hikers or whatever who might come by? I understood her adolescent self-consciousness immediately. This pool is on private land, my property. The nearest public trail is 3 miles away. It's just us. That was all the reassurance she needed. With a decisive motion, she pulled off her outer shirt, she was wearing a tank top underneath, and stepped into the pool, gasping at the cold, but pushing forward until she was immersed to her shoulders. For a moment she remained still, acclimating, then slowly leaned backward until she was floating, face toward the sky, dark hair spreading around her like a halo in the clear water. "This is," she started, then paused as if searching for adequate words. "I've never felt anything like this." I nodded, understanding completely. Natural swimming holds a qualitatively different experience from chlorinated pools or artificially maintained beaches, something primal and connecting that can't be fully articulated. We spent nearly 2 hours at the pool, the children's initial hyperactivity giving way to more contemplative water play. Kevin built a small dam of stones across a section of the pool's outlet stream, creating a miniature engineering project that occupied him completely. Kimberly discovered a tiny frog and spent 30 minutes observing its movements with uncharacteristic patience, and Candace alternated between floating silently and sitting on a sun-warmed rock, sketching the waterfall in a small notebook I hadn't seen before. As we finally packed up to begin our return journey, Kevin asked, "Can we come back tomorrow?" "The waterfall will always be here," I told him, "but tomorrow I thought we might try something different. There's an old fire tower on the eastern ridge. From the top you can see all the way to the next county on clear days. Instead of the expected resistance to yet another hike, I received 3 enthusiastic nods. Something fundamental had shifted. Their default response was no longer automatic rejection, but genuine curiosity about what new experience might await. On the walk back, Candace fell into step beside me, letting the twins range ahead within sight but out of earshot. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," she said suddenly, "about different ways to measure success." "Oh?" I kept my tone casual, sensing the importance of not overreacting to this voluntary conversation. "Yeah, I think maybe I've been measuring it wrong too. Like I've been so focused on getting likes and follows, on having the right clothes and being seen with the right people." She glanced at me. "It sounds stupid when I say it out loud." "Not stupid," I corrected gently. "Just one particular value system. The question is whether it's bringing you fulfillment or just temporary validation." She was quiet for several steps, considering this. "I don't think I know what real fulfillment feels like," she finally admitted. I gestured toward the forest around us. "This is a good place to start finding out." The 7th day brought rain, not the gentle, misty precipitation that occasionally drifted through the mountains, but a proper summer thunderstorm that rolled in before dawn with dramatic flashes of lightning and window-rattling thunder. By breakfast time, water streamed from the cabin's eaves in silver curtains, and the forest beyond the windows had transformed into a dripping, fog-shrouded mystery. "I guess we're not hiking today," Kevin said, his disappointment evident as he pressed his nose against the glass, watching raindrops race down the pane. "Today we experience a different aspect of nature," I told him, setting a pot of cocoa on the wood stove I'd lit to ward off the unusual chill. "Storms are as much a part of the forest's life as sunshine." "What do people do out here when it rains?" Kimberly asked, genuine curiosity replacing what would have been a complaint just days ago. "We listen," I said simply. "We observe, we catch up on indoor projects, and sometimes we just sit and be." "Be what?" Kevin looked confused. "Not be anything, just be." I smiled at his puzzlement. It's a concept many adults struggle with too, the idea of existing without constant doing. "Like meditation?" Candace asked unexpectedly. I glanced at her with renewed interest. "Yes, something like that." "Have you tried meditation?" She shrugged, stirring her oatmeal. "They offered it at school last year. Mindfulness sessions. Most kids thought it was stupid, but I kind of liked it. This small revelation, one she would certainly never have shared with her mother, confirmed my growing understanding of my eldest grandchild. Beneath her carefully constructed shell of teenage indifference lay a contemplative spirit struggling to emerge within a family and social system that valued external achievement over internal development. As we finished breakfast, I outlined the day's options. We could make candles from the beeswax I collected last month, or start the quilt we talked about yesterday using scraps from the rag bag. There's bread dough rising that will need kneading soon. And of course, the bookshelves are full if you'd prefer quiet reading time. To my delight, each child chose a different activity. Kevin was eager to try candle making, his perpetual energy finding purpose in the methodical dipping process. Kimberly, who had revealed an unexpected interest in texture and color, gravitated toward the quilt project. And Candace, after examining the bookshelves more carefully than she'd allowed herself to do previously, selected a volume on native medicinal plants that had belonged to my grandmother. The morning passed in comfortable productivity, the storm providing both soundtrack and backdrop to our indoor pursuits. I moved between children, offering guidance when needed, but mostly allowing them to explore their chosen activities independently. Kevin's candles emerged somewhat lopsided but functional, his pride in creating something useful from raw materials evident in his excited commentary. Kimberly's quilting stitches were uneven but enthusiastic, and she displayed a natural eye for color combinations as she arranged fabric scraps into a pleasing pattern. Candace remained absorbed in her book, occasionally making notes in the small journal she'd begun carrying, the same one I'd noticed at the waterfall. When she thought no one was watching, I observed her sketching leaf patterns and copying information about plant properties, her focus complete. The sullen teenager who had arrived with perpetual complaints about boredom had vanished entirely, replaced by a young scholar conducting independent research with genuine passion. After lunch, soup simmered with vegetables from the garden and the last of yesterday's bread. The storm intensified. Wind whipped rain against the windows in horizontal sheets, and thunder crashed directly overhead. Rather than inspiring fear, the dramatic weather seemed to energize the children. "This is way better than those fake thunderstorm sounds on Kimmy's white noise app," Kevin declared, abandoning his candles to press against the window, counting seconds between lightning and thunder to calculate the storm's distance. "It's like we're inside the storm instead of just hearing it," Kimberly agreed, joining her brother at the window. Her earlier fear of natural phenomena had evolved into fascinated respect, a healthier relationship with the world's more challenging aspects. As afternoon progressed, the storm's fury gradually subsided, leaving steady rain in its wake. The consistent patter on the cabin's roof created a cocoon of sound that wrapped around us, somehow both stimulating and calming. I noticed Candace had moved from the table to the window seat, her book abandoned as she gazed out at the transformed landscape, completely absorbed in the simple act of watching raindrops collect and fall from leaves. "I've never just watched rain before," she said when she noticed me observing her. "At home, rain is annoying. It messes up your hair or your shoes, makes you late for things. I never thought of it as something to actually pay attention to." "Most natural processes reward close attention," I told her. "There are patterns and rhythms we miss when we're rushing through life, focused only on human schedules and concerns." She considered this, tracing a raindrop's path down the window with her fingertip. "I've been thinking about what you said before, about different ways of measuring success. I think maybe peace could be one way, like the success of a moment could be measured by how peaceful it feels." The insight struck me as remarkably profound for a 15-year-old whose life had been structured around achievement and external validation. "That's a beautiful perspective, Candace. And yes, I think peace is a very valuable metric, both internal peace and harmony with one's surroundings." She glanced at me, then back at the rain. "I feel peaceful here," she admitted quietly. "For the first time in, I don't even know how long." Before I could respond, Kevin interrupted with an excited shout from the other window. "Grandma Flo, there's a deer, right there by the big pine tree." We all gathered at his window, watching as a doe and her fawn emerged cautiously from the forest edge, moving with delicate precision across the clearing beside the cabin. The rain had softened to a gentle mist, and evening sunlight had begun to penetrate the clouds, casting the scene in a golden glow that seemed almost deliberately theatrical in its beauty. "They're so close," Kimberly whispered, awestruck. "The rain dampens our scent," I explained softly, "and they're used to my presence here. I've never threatened them, so they've come to accept the cabin as part of their environment." We watched in reverent silence as the deer grazed peacefully, the fawn occasionally prancing in small circles around its mother, tail flicking with youthful energy. It was a scene no wildlife documentary could fully capture. The immediacy of witnessing these wild creatures going about their lives just feet away, unaware of being observed through glass, After several minutes, the doe raised her head suddenly, ears pivoting toward some sound we couldn't detect. With a flick of her tail as signal, she and the fawn bounded back into the forest, disappearing into the underbrush as silently as they had emerged. That was, Kevin began, then stopped, apparently unable to find adequate words. Magic, Kimberly supplied. Real magic, Candace agreed. Not the fake kind in movies. As dusk settled around the cabin, we prepared a simple dinner together. Tasks divided by unspoken agreement, each child having found their niche in our small domestic ecosystem. Kevin set the table with unexpected care, arranging his handmade candles as centerpieces. Kimberly assembled a salad, meticulously incorporating herbs I'd taught her to identify from the kitchen garden. And Candace, most surprisingly, took charge of the main dish, a vegetable stew she'd helped me prepare the day before, now reheated and enhanced with fresh additions. Watching them move around the kitchen with growing confidence, I felt a profound satisfaction that transcended mere pride in their developing skills. Something fundamental was shifting in these young people, a reconnection with basic human competencies and natural rhythms that their technology-saturated, convenience-oriented urban lives had never required or encouraged. The storm had provided an unexpected gift, a day of enforced contemplation and presence that had deepened our connection not just to each other, but to the elemental experience of being human in a world that extends far beyond our constructed environments and artificial timelines. I think, Kevin said thoughtfully as we sat down to eat by candlelight, this was my favorite day so far. Looking at their peaceful faces, illuminated by the warm glow of beeswax candles, I silently agreed. By the end of the first week, we had settled into a rhythm that would have been unimaginable when the children first arrived. Mornings began with shared responsibility for breakfast. Kevin had become surprisingly adept at stoking the wood stove to just the right temperature. Kimberly had developed a signature oatmeal with foraged berries and honey, and Candace had taken over coffee preparation with scientific precision, treating my old stovetop percolator like laboratory equipment requiring exact measurements and timing. No one mentioned screens anymore. The twins had stopped asking about television or video games, their endless energy channeled into exploration and hands-on projects. Candace's phone remained plugged in, but ignored, like a vestigial appendage no longer serving any vital function. I had caught her looking at it once or twice, but with bemused detachment rather than longing, as if it were an artifact from a former life she was rapidly outgrowing. On the 8th morning, I proposed something different. Today, I announced as we cleared the breakfast dishes, each of you will lead an expedition. 3 pairs of eyes regarded me with varying degrees of surprise and interest. What do you mean? Kevin asked. I mean that instead of me deciding where we go and what we observe, each of you will take a turn leading us to something you've discovered or something you're curious about. You'll be the guides. I'll be the follower. The idea clearly intrigued them. After brief consideration, we decided that Kevin would lead the morning expedition, Kimberly the afternoon, and Candace would guide us on an evening excursion, taking advantage of the clear night forecast for stargazing. Kevin's choice was immediate and characteristic, the beaver pond, which had become his favorite location. But instead of taking the direct path I'd shown them initially, he led us on a circuitous route he'd apparently been exploring on his own during our daily adventures. I found a different way that goes past the fox den, he explained with newfound confidence. And there's a really cool hollow tree that has mushrooms growing inside it, like the whole inside is filled with them. His path indeed revealed features of the forest I hadn't shown them, demonstrating how thoroughly he'd been absorbing our surroundings. When we reached the hollow tree he'd described, I was impressed by the thriving fungal ecosystem within. A spectacular display of oyster mushrooms cascading down the interior of the dead trunk. Kevin, this is a wonderful find, I told him sincerely. These oyster mushrooms are not only beautiful but edible. If you'd like, we could harvest some for dinner tonight. His eyes widened. We can eat these? For real? They're not poisonous? Oyster mushrooms are among the safest wild mushrooms to identify, I confirmed. Notice the distinctive shape, the gills that run all the way down the stem, and the slightly sweet smell. Under my guidance, he carefully harvested a portion of the mushrooms, leaving plenty to continue spreading their spores. His pride in providing food for our dinner was palpable, a new experience for a child whose sustenance had always appeared prepackaged or restaurant-prepared. disconnected from its origins. Kimberly's afternoon expedition revealed her own unique perspective. She led us to a small clearing I'd shown them briefly during an earlier walk, but instead of passing through as we had before, she insisted we lie on our backs in the grass and look upward. "Everyone's always looking forward when they walk," she explained with 8-year-old wisdom. "But there's a whole different forest if you look up." Following her instruction, we reclined in the clearing's soft grass. The perspective shift was indeed dramatic. Treetops swayed against blue sky, creating a living cathedral of intersecting branches and dappled light. Birds moved through upper canopies, and occasionally a squirrel would leap from branch to branch, visible only because of our unusual viewpoint. "I've been counting how many different bird songs I can hear," Kimberly told us proudly. "I'm up to 12 distinct ones, but I don't know all their names yet." "That's excellent observation, Kimberly," I praised her. "Identifying birds by sound is a skill that takes time to develop. Some expert birders can recognize hundreds of species just by their calls." We spent nearly an hour in the clearing, simply listening and looking upward. I identified bird songs when I could, but mostly encouraged the children to develop their own awareness, to notice patterns and differences without rushing to categorize. This type of open attention, observing without immediately analyzing or naming, was a cognitive skill sadly underdeveloped in education systems focused on testable knowledge rather than experiential understanding. Candace's evening expedition was the most elaborate. After dinner, which featured Kevin's mushrooms sautéed with garden herbs, she led us not to the usual stargazing rock, but to a small rise beyond the cabin I hadn't realized she'd discovered. She had clearly prepared in advance, bringing the quilts from our beds to spread on the ground, thermoses of hot chocolate she'd prepared without assistance, and most surprisingly, a set of star charts she'd drawn herself, based on her studies of my astronomy books. "I thought we could track the movement of specific constellations," she explained as we settled onto the quilts. "If we note the exact position now, then check again in 2 hours, we can actually see the rotation of the Earth reflected in how they move across the sky." Her preparation and scientific approach impressed me deeply. This was not a teenager humoring her grandmother, but a young scientist designing an observational study with proper methodology. "That's an excellent experimental design, Candace," I told her. "The ancient astronomers used similar techniques to map the heavens long before they had modern equipment." As darkness deepened and stars emerged in breathtaking profusion, Candace guided us through her planned observations. She had developed a genuine facility with the telescope, locating celestial objects with increasing skill. But more impressive was her ability to share her knowledge with her younger siblings, explaining complex astronomical concepts in terms they could understand without condescension. "See that cluster there?" she asked Kevin, helping him cite along her pointing finger. "That's the Pleiades, the 7 sisters. Different cultures around the world have stories about them. The Greeks thought they were the daughters of Atlas, turned into stars to escape a hunter. But Native Americans had completely different stories for the same stars. How can the same stars be in different stories?" Kimberly wondered. "Because humans make meaning from what they observe," Candace explained with surprising insight. "The stars themselves don't tell stories. We create stories to understand them, based on our own cultures and experiences." I listened to this exchange with quiet amazement. The sullen, phone-obsessed teenager who had arrived at my cabin just over a week ago had transformed into a thoughtful young philosopher capable of contemplating how humans construct meaning from natural phenomena. It was the kind of intellectual and spiritual growth I had hoped for, but hadn't dared expect so quickly. As we concluded our stargazing session, the children growing drowsy despite their interest, Candace lingered behind when the twins headed back to the cabin. In the moonlight, her expression was uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Grandma," she said quietly, "I've been thinking about something, and I wanted to ask you about it before Mom and Dad come back." "Of course," I encouraged, sensing the importance of whatever she was struggling to articulate. "I don't want to go back to how things were before." Her voice caught slightly. "Being here has made me realize how empty everything felt. School, friends, social media, it all seems so fake now, so pointless. Change is difficult," I acknowledged, "especially when you're the one who's changed while everything around you remains the same." She nodded, eyes fixed on the star-filled sky. "I was thinking, what if I didn't go back? What if I stayed here with you, at least for a while? The question hung between us, weighted with implications that extended far beyond this summer night. In her young face, illuminated by starlight, I saw both hope and fear, the tentative reaching toward an authentic life and the terror of rejection. That, I said carefully, would be a very big decision, with many factors to consider. But I'm honored that you would even think of it. Will you at least think about it, she pressed, before they come back? I promise to give it serious thought, I assured her. And we'll talk more about what it might look like, practically speaking. She seemed satisfied with this non-committal response, at least for now. As we walked back to the cabin together, her hand slipped into mine, a gesture of childlike trust I hadn't experienced from her since she was very small. In that simple touch, I felt the weight of responsibility her question had placed on me, along with the precious opportunity it represented. The lesson I had planned for my grandchildren had yielded results beyond my expectations. The question now was how to preserve these transformations beyond our time together in the forest, and whether Candace's radical proposal might actually be the answer, not just for her, but for all of us. The second week deepened the changes I'd observed in my grandchildren, cementing new habits and perspectives that would have seemed impossible when they first arrived. The twins now moved through the forest with confidence rather than trepidation, distinguishing edible berries from toxic ones, identifying animal tracks, and navigating by natural landmarks instead of GPS. Their constant questions had evolved from, "When can we go home?" to "How does this work?" and "Why does that happen?" The fundamental queries of naturally curious minds engaging with their environment. But it was Candace whose transformation remained most profound. After broaching the subject of staying with me, she had thrown herself into forest life with redoubled enthusiasm, as if determined to prove her seriousness. She rose before dawn to accompany me on my morning data collection rounds, diligently recording temperature, rainfall, and wildlife sightings in her own journal. She had begun a meticulous herbarium, pressing plant specimens between pages of old encyclopedias and labeling each with both scientific and common names. Most surprisingly, she had developed an unexpected bond with my neighbor Gerald, an 80-year-old retired botanist who lived 3 miles away, my closest human neighbor both geographically and philosophically. I'd taken the children to visit his cabin on day 10, primarily to show them his remarkable greenhouse where he propagated endangered native plant species. While the twins had been politely interested, Candace had remained behind when we left, absorbed in conversation with Gerald about his conservation work. She'd returned to my cabin hours later, bursting with excitement about Gerald's offer to teach her grafting techniques for rare apple varieties he was preserving from abandoned homesteads throughout the region. He says these heritage apples are disappearing because commercial orchards only grow a few varieties, she explained breathlessly. Some of these trees are over 100 years old, with unique flavors and disease resistance that could be lost forever if no one preserves them. Her passion was unmistakably genuine, a spark of purpose I'd never observed during family holiday visits, where she typically remained glued to her phone, responding to direct questions with minimal syllables. On the 12th day, as I prepared lunch after a morning spent teaching the twins to fish in the creek, resulting in 2 small trout that Kevin had cleaned with surprising dexterity after initial squeamishness, Candace approached me with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Grandma," she began, fidgeting with the corner of her journal, "I need to talk to you about something important." I set aside the vegetables I was chopping and gave her my full attention. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking more about what I said the other night. About maybe staying here with you." Her words came more rapidly now, as if she'd rehearsed them. "I know it sounds crazy, and Mom and Dad would probably freak out, but I've been researching it, and there are these things called independent study programs, where I could do my schoolwork remotely and just go in for tests and labs." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, a printout she must have made during her visit to Gerald's cabin, which, unlike mine, had satellite internet. Gerald helped me look this up. There's a program through my school district specifically for students with exceptional circumstances or unique educational opportunities. Living here with you would definitely qualify as both. She pushed the paper toward me. I could maintain my GPA, stay on track for college, but learn in a completely different environment. I examined the printout, impressed by her thoroughness. The program she'd identified was legitimate. similar to arrangements made for student athletes or performers whose training and competition schedules precluded traditional classroom attendance. This is well researched, Candace, I acknowledged, but there are many other factors to consider beyond academic arrangements. Your parents would need to approve this, and it would significantly change both our lives, yours and mine. I know. She met my gaze directly. But I've never been sure about anything the way I'm sure about this. Being here has shown me what I want to do with my life. I want to study ecology or conservation biology. I want to work with plants and ecosystems, not sit in an office staring at spreadsheets like Mom and Dad. Her clarity was compelling, but I maintained my measured response. These are big decisions, and they don't need to be made immediately. Let's continue this conversation after you've had more time to consider all implications. She looked momentarily frustrated by my caution, but nodded agreement. Just promise you'll really think about it, that you won't just dismiss it as a teenage phase or whatever. I promise to give it the serious consideration it deserves, I assured her. Your feelings and insights are valid, regardless of your age. This seemed to satisfy her, and she rejoined her siblings, who were proudly preparing their caught fish for cooking. I watched them work together, Kevin scaling, Kimberly seasoning with herbs she'd helped harvest from my garden, and marveled at the self-sufficiency they'd developed in less than 2 weeks. That evening, after the twins had fallen asleep exhausted from their day's adventures, Candace and I sat on the porch watching fireflies emerge from the darkening forest edge. The conversation turned naturally to her future aspirations. What exactly is it about this life that speaks to you so strongly? I asked, genuinely curious about the specificity of her attraction to my deliberately simplified existence. She considered the question carefully. It's the realness of everything, she finally said. At home, everything feels filtered, like we're always experiencing life through screens or other people's expectations. School is about grades, not learning. Social media is about likes, not connection. Even our house doesn't feel real sometimes. It's more like a showplace Mom maintains for guests who rarely come. Her insight into her parents' lifestyle was remarkably perceptive. Here, she continued, gesturing toward the firefly-dotted darkness, every experience is direct. When it rains, you get wet. When you're hungry, you make food. Real food that you might have grown or gathered yourself. When you're tired, you sleep. And when you wake up, you can actually see the stars fade as the sun rises. She paused. It's like the difference between watching a nature documentary and actually being in nature. That's a profound observation, I told her. Many adults never develop that awareness of the difference between mediated and direct experience. Gerald said something similar when I was talking to him, she said. He called it the Great Displacement, how modern humans have separated themselves from natural systems while remaining completely dependent on them. He says most people don't even know where their food comes from beyond the supermarket or where their waste goes beyond the trash can. I smiled, recognizing my old friend's familiar ecological perspective. Gerald has been thinking about these issues for many decades. He's a valuable mentor. That's another thing, Candace added eagerly. At home, everyone I know is basically the same age, except for teachers who maintain this professional distance. Here, I've had more meaningful conversations with you and Gerald in 2 weeks than I've had with anyone my own age in years. The depth of her reflection reinforced my growing sense that this wasn't merely teenage impulsivity, but a genuine recognition of alignment between her emerging values and the lifestyle I had chosen. Still, my responsibility was to ensure she understood the full implications of what she was proposing. Living this way involves sacrifices, I reminded her. Limited internet access, distance from friends, fewer material comforts, winters that are beautiful but challenging. I know, she acknowledged, but it also means gaining things that matter more: purpose, connection, real skills, actual silence when you want it. She gestured toward her sleeping siblings inside. Look at how happy Kevin and Kimberly are here once they got past the withdrawal from their devices. They're sleeping better, eating better, getting along better than I've ever seen at home. Children are remarkably adaptable, I agreed. More so than adults sometimes. So you'll consider it? Really consider it? Her voice held cautious hope. Yes, I told her, making the decision even as I spoke. I'll consider it. And if you still feel this way when your parents return, we can discuss approaching them together about a trial period, perhaps through the end of summer, before making longer-term arrangements. The smile that illuminated her face carried none of the artificial performance quality I'd observed in her expressions before. The practiced selfie smile, the social compliance smile. This was pure joy, unfiltered and genuine. "Thank you," she whispered, suddenly wrapping her arms around me in an impulsive hug, "for taking me seriously, for seeing me." As I returned her embrace, I reflected on the unexpected direction this enforced babysitting had taken. What had begun as a lesson in nature appreciation had evolved into something far more significant, potentially a life-altering redirection for a young person who had found her true north in an environment most of her peers would consider primitive and deprived. The real test, of course, would come when Connie and Joe returned, when the bubble of our forest interlude met the reality of parental expectations and established family dynamics. But for now, in this moment of authentic connection, beneath a star-filled sky, I allowed myself to envision a future with Candace by my side, our separate solitudes enriched by shared purpose. As our 2 weeks together drew to a close, a subtle tension crept into our forest idyll. The impending return of Connie and Joe cast a shadow over our daily activities, particularly for Candace, who had begun checking the calendar with increasing frequency, as if hoping to find additional days mysteriously inserted between us and her parents' arrival. The twins, while clearly transformed by their experiences, maintained the natural resilience of 8-year-olds. They would undoubtedly miss aspects of cabin life, but their developmental flexibility would ease their transition back to urban comforts. Candace, however, stood at a more complex crossroads, old enough to articulate her desires, but still legally dependent on parents who might struggle to understand the profound shift in her priorities and perspective. On our final full day together, I planned a special expedition, a challenging hike to the highest point on my property, a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. The climb required genuine effort, with sections steep enough to necessitate scrambling on all fours. I had deliberately saved this adventure for last, knowing it would provide both physical challenge and symbolic achievement. "This is the perfect final test," I told them, as we prepared our day packs with water, lunch, and emergency supplies. "Everything you've learned about moving through the forest, reading the landscape, and supporting each other will come into play." Kevin took this framing seriously, approaching the preparation with military precision. He had assumed the role of equipment manager during our excursions, ensuring we had appropriate first aid supplies, extra layers, and sufficient food. Kimberly, who had overcome her initial fear of forest creatures, now served as our naturalist, noting interesting plants and insects along our routes, and Candace had become our navigator, developing an impressive ability to read the landscape and maintain orientation without electronic assistance. The ascent began gently enough, following a game trail through mixed hardwood forest. The children moved with confidence I would never have imagined possible 2 weeks ago, recognizing poison ivy without prompting, instinctively testing loose rocks before putting their weight down, and maintaining awareness of their surroundings that balanced enthusiasm with appropriate caution. As the trail steepened, natural teamwork emerged. When Kimberly struggled with a particularly challenging section, Kevin immediately dropped back to offer a supportive hand. When Kevin became frustrated after losing his footing, Candace demonstrated an alternative route with better handholds. Their interactions flowed with a natural rhythm of mutual support I'd rarely observed in their previous family dynamics, which had tended toward competitive bickering rather than collaboration. Near the summit, we encountered the most difficult stretch, a near-vertical scramble up a rocky face about 15 feet high. Not technically dangerous with proper care, but intimidating enough that I watched closely, ready to assist if needed. "I don't think I can do this part," Kimberly said, eyeing the climb with apprehension. "Let's break it down," Candace suggested before I could intervene. "See these 3 rock ledges? They're like a natural staircase. I'll go first and show you where to put your hands and feet." With remarkable patience, she demonstrated the climb in slow motion, verbally guiding her younger sister through each movement. "Right hand to the crack there. Now your left foot on that flat spot. Perfect. Now reach up to where I am." Kevin followed their progress with intense concentration, absorbing the technique before attempting his own ascent with methodical care. When all 3 had successfully navigated the challenge, their faces glowed with well-earned pride, Not the fleeting satisfaction of a video game achievement, but the deep-rooted confidence that comes from overcoming genuine physical obstacles through persistence and skill. The summit itself rewarded our efforts spectacularly. From this vantage point, the valley spread below us in a panorama of forest, meadows, and distant mountains, blue with haze. A red-tailed hawk circled lazily on thermals above the valley floor, and the silver thread of the creek winding through my property was visible in occasional glints through the canopy. "It's like we can see the whole world," Kevin breathed, turning slowly to take in the 360-degree view. "Look, there's the cabin." Kimberly pointed excitedly to the small clearing visible in the distance, my modest dwelling nestled against the hillside like a natural feature of the landscape. Candace said nothing, but her expression as she surveyed the vista communicated volumes, a mixture of wonder, belonging, and unmistakable yearning. She pulled out her journal and began sketching the panorama with quick, confident strokes, adding notes about cardinal directions and prominent features as if creating a memory she could physically carry with her. We spread our picnic lunch on a flat rock warmed by the afternoon sun, the simple food tasting extraordinary in this elevated setting. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences as we absorbed the beauty surrounding us. "Grandma," Kevin said during one such pause, "will you teach Mom and Dad how to do all this stuff when they come back, so we can keep doing it even after we go home?" The innocent question illuminated the central challenge awaiting us. How much of this experience could translate back into their regular lives? How much would their parents be willing or able to incorporate into their established patterns? "I'll certainly share what we've learned together," I promised, though without specific commitments I couldn't guarantee. "And you can be teachers too, showing them your new skills and knowledge. Mom's afraid of spiders," Kimberly pointed out practically. "And Dad always says he doesn't have time for hikes. People can surprise you," I suggested, though I privately shared her skepticism about Connie's willingness to embrace forest immersion. Sometimes, seeing something through your children's eyes helps adults reconsider their own limitations. Candace had remained silent during this exchange, her attention apparently focused on her sketching. But as we began packing up for our descent, she pulled me aside while the twins explored a nearby rock formation. "I need to talk to them tomorrow," she said, with quiet determination. "About staying here. I've thought about everything you said, the sacrifices, the challenges. I'm still certain this is what I want." Her resolute expression reflected the maturity she'd developed during our time together. This wasn't impulsive teenage rebellion, but a considered choice aligned with genuine self-discovery. "We'll approach it carefully," I advised. "Your parents will need time to process such an unexpected proposal. They may have initial reactions based on surprise rather than thoughtful consideration." "I know Mom will freak out," Candace acknowledged. "She has our whole lives planned. The right college, the right career track, the right neighborhood eventually. This doesn't fit her script at all. Remember that her concerns, however frustrating, likely come from genuine care," I suggested. "Parents often confuse their vision of what's best for their children with what actually is best. The challenge is helping them see the difference." "Will you back me up?" she asked, vulnerability breaking through her determined facade. "When I tell them tomorrow? I'll support your right to be heard," I promised, "and I'll offer a practical framework that addresses their legitimate concerns while respecting your insights about your own needs and aspirations." This seemed to satisfy her, and we rejoined the twins for our descent. The return journey proceeded smoothly, all three children applying their newly developed skills with confidence and appropriate caution. The forest that had initially seemed threatening to them now felt like familiar territory, not without its challenges and mysteries, but navigable through knowledge, attention, and mutual support. As evening settled around the cabin, our final night together carried a bittersweet quality. We prepared dinner collectively, each child contributing components they had mastered during our time together. Kevin built and maintained the perfect cooking fire. Kimberly assembled a salad featuring items she had helped harvest from the garden, and Candace prepared a surprising dessert, wild blackberry cobbler made from berries we had gathered the previous day, following a recipe she had carefully transcribed from my handwritten cookbook. After dinner, we sat on the porch watching fireflies emerge from the darkening forest edge. The atmosphere was contemplative rather than melancholy, a shared awareness that something significant was ending, but also that something meaningful had been created that would persist beyond our time together. "I have something for each of you," I said, retrieving the small packages I had prepared during quiet moments over the past few days, tokens to remember our forest lessons. For Kevin, I had created a small field guide of animal tracks we had identified together, illustrated with my own drawings and including his observations written in his own words, his first scientific publication of sorts. For Kimberly, a collection of pressed flowers and leaves we had gathered, mounted with information about each species and its ecological role. And for Candace, a more substantial gift, my grandmother's journal documenting her own nature observations and herbal knowledge, a family legacy I had always intended to pass on to someone who would truly value it. As they examined their gifts with evident appreciation, I observed the changes written in their very postures, the increased confidence, the greater ease in their bodies, the capacity for sustained attention that had replaced restless electronic dependency. Whatever happened tomorrow when their parents returned, these transformations were real, and I hoped enduring. Whatever comes next, I told them as we prepared for our final night's rest, remember that what you've learned here isn't just about forest skills. It's about how to be fully present in your own lives, how to observe closely, how to find wonder in ordinary things, and how to make really good blackberry cobbler, Kevin added with characteristic pragmatism, lightening the moment. We laughed together, the sound mingling with night insects and distant owl calls in the symphony of forest evening. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges as our forest interlude collided with the expectations and patterns of their regular lives. But tonight, in this moment, we had achieved something genuine and precious, a reconnection with basic human capacities for attention, wonder, and direct engagement with the natural world. As the children settled into sleep, I remained on the porch, contemplating the lesson I had prepared for Connie, a lesson far more challenging than any I had offered my grandchildren, and one whose reception was far less certain. The true test of our forest transformation would come not in the wilderness, but in the reaction of those who had, inadvertently, made it possible through their casual dismissal. You're at loose ends anyway. You can watch them while we travel. The lesson was prepared. Tomorrow would reveal whether anyone beyond my grandchildren was ready to learn it. They arrived precisely at noon, their luxury SUV incongruous against the rustic backdrop of my cabin, gleaming with city polish that seemed almost vulgar after 2 weeks immersed in natural textures and earth tones. I watched from the porch as Connie emerged first, designer sunglasses perched on her highlighted hair, scanning the clearing with barely concealed apprehension, perhaps expecting to find her children transformed into wild creatures after their forest exile. Joe followed more slowly, his business casual attire suggesting they had other appointments scheduled after retrieving their children, efficiency always being paramount in their tightly choreographed lives. His expression was difficult to read, part guilt, part curiosity, part the perpetual distraction of a man whose attention was divided between present circumstances and the endless stream of emails undoubtedly accumulating on his silenced phone. I had strategically positioned myself alone on the porch, the children inside preparing the small welcome display they had insisted on creating, a tableau of their forest discoveries and creations arranged on the main table. This staging was deliberate, allowing me to observe Connie and Joe's unfiltered reactions without the immediate distraction of the children's presence. "Florence," Connie called with false brightness as they approached. "The place looks exactly the same." The pause suggested she had searched for a compliment and failed to find one. "Nature changes slowly," I replied mildly. "That's part of its wisdom." Joe offered a more genuine smile as he reached the porch steps. "Thanks for taking the kids, Mom. The trip was exactly what we needed, completely rejuvenating." "I'm glad to hear it," I said, noting that neither had actually asked about their children yet. "Your timing is perfect. We've just finished preparing lunch if you'd like to join us before heading back." "Oh, we should really get on the road," Connie began, but Joe interrupted with unexpected assertiveness. "Actually, lunch sounds great. We have time." This minor disagreement, Joe countermanding Connie's reflexive efficiency, was unusual enough to raise my interest. Perhaps their rejuvenating trip had shifted some dynamics between them as well. As I led them inside, their reactions to the cabin's interior told distinct stories. Connie's gaze darted critically over the simple furnishings and handmade touches, mentally cataloging all that didn't meet her standards of contemporary comfort. Joe, however, seemed to relax slightly, his shoulders lowering as he absorbed the cabin's peaceful atmosphere, a subtle homecoming I hadn't anticipated. Then the children appeared, and all other observations became secondary to the dramatic tableau of recognition unfolding before me. Connie actually took a physical step backward, her practiced smile faltering. "Oh my God," she breathed, the exclamation escaping before she could censor it. Joe simply stared, his mouth slightly open in genuine shock. The transformation was indeed striking, even to me who had witnessed its gradual progression. All three children stood straighter, their postures reflecting newfound physical confidence. Their skin glowed with health, tanned, a few minor scratches and insect bites visible as badges of authentic outdoor engagement. Their clothing was functional and well-worn, dirt embedded in knees and elbows. But most dramatically, their expressions reflected a centered alertness utterly unlike the restless, screen-oriented distraction that had characterized them upon arrival. Kevin broke the stunned silence, rushing forward with unrestrained enthusiasm. "Dad! Mom! We have so much to show you. I made fire. Like actual fire with just sticks and kindling. And we saw beavers building a dam. And I caught fish and—" "Slow down, honey," Connie interrupted, her voice higher than normal as she attempted to process this unfamiliar version of her son. "You look so different." Kimberly approached more carefully, her natural sensitivity making her acutely aware of her mother's discomfort. "We made you something, Mom," she said, taking Connie's hand and guiding her to the display table. "I pressed flowers from Grandma Flo's garden, and Kevin made the frame from sticks he collected." "That's creative?" Connie managed, examining the rustic picture frame containing a carefully arranged bouquet of pressed wildflowers. "Very natural." Joe, meanwhile, had moved toward Candace, who had remained slightly apart from her siblings, watching the reunion with measured assessment. "You look good, Candy," he said, using the childhood nickname she had insisted on abandoning years ago. Surprisingly, she didn't correct him. "Thanks, Dad," she replied with a calm directness that was itself a revelation, none of the defensive teenage posturing that had characterized their interactions before. As we settled around the table for lunch, a simple but abundant spread of garden vegetables, fresh bread, and the last of yesterday's trout, the contrast between our forest-adapted tribe and the newly arrived urbanites could not have been more pronounced. The children moved with natural ease, serving food and distributing handmade wooden plates without prompting. Connie and Joe sat stiffly, clearly unsure how to navigate this unfamiliar version of their family. "So," Connie began after taking a small, cautious bite of trout, "it looks like you've all been busy." "Grandma Flo taught us everything," Kevin declared proudly. "I can identify 14 different animal tracks now, and Kimberly knows which plants are edible and which ones make you sick." "That's useful," Connie replied, her tone suggesting precisely the opposite. "Though I'm not sure when you'll need those skills in Westchester." "Actually," Kimberly piped up, "Dad said there's a nature preserve just 3 miles from our house. We've never been there, but now we know what to look for. Kevin and I want to start cataloging the species there, like real scientists." Joe looked up with surprise. "The Marshall Preserve? I didn't realize you even knew about that place." "Grandma showed us on a map," Kevin explained. "She said urban forests need protection and study too, not just wild places like here." I caught Candace's eye across the table, a silent communication passing between us. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. It was time. "Mom, Dad," she began, her voice steady, despite the slight tremor in her hands. "I need to talk to you about something important." Connie's expression immediately shifted to alert concern, the default parental response to serious teenager declarations. "What is it, honey? Is everything okay?" "Everything is better than okay," Candace said carefully. "These 2 weeks have changed how I see things, how I see myself, and what I want for my future." "That's wonderful," Joe responded, though his cautious tone suggested awareness that a challenging revelation might follow. "I want to stay here with Grandma," Candace stated simply. "Not just for the rest of the summer, but for the school year, maybe longer." The stunned silence that followed was almost palpable. Connie looked from Candace to me with naked disbelief, as if we had conspired to stage an elaborate prank. Joe's expression was more complex, surprise certainly, but also a flicker of something else I couldn't immediately identify. "That's not possible," Connie declared flatly, recovering first. Your school, your activities, your friends, everything is in Westchester. I've researched the options, Candace countered, her preparation evident in her measured response. There's an independent study program through my school district for situations exactly like this. I can maintain my academic standing while completing coursework remotely, going in only for exams and lab requirements. She slid the printout across the table, the same one she had shown me earlier in the week, now augmented with additional notes and highlighted sections addressing potential parental concerns. This is ridiculous, Connie said, not even glancing at the paper. Florence, did you put her up to this? Candace came to me with this idea, I replied calmly. I've listened and asked questions to help her think through the implications, but this is her proposal, not mine. You can't seriously be considering this, Connie pressed, her voice rising. She's 15, Florence. She needs structure, socialization, normal teenage experiences. I've had years of normal teenage experiences, Candace interjected. You know what they've given me? Anxiety, insecurity, and the feeling that nothing I do is ever enough. Here, I've learned things that actually matter. I've discovered what I'm passionate about. Passionate about what? Trees? Bugs? Connie's dismissive tone triggered a visible flinch from Kimberly, who had spent the past week proudly documenting precisely those elements of the natural world. Environmental science, Candace corrected firmly. Conservation biology, the study of interconnected living systems. I've found my path, Mom. For the first time in my life, I know what I want to do, not just what's expected of me. The conviction in her voice struck me as the most powerful argument she could make. This wasn't teenage rebellion, but genuine self-discovery. Joe seemed to recognize this too, studying his daughter with newfound attention. Let's all take a deep breath, he suggested, surprising me with his moderating role. Usually Connie dominated family discussions. Candace, these are big life changes you're proposing. We need time to discuss this properly, to consider all aspects. That's fair, Candace acknowledged, the maturity of her response another testament to her transformation. But please actually read my research and proposal before dismissing it outright. Joe picked up the printout, scanning it with the focused attention he typically reserved for business documents. This is more comprehensive than I expected, he admitted after a moment. Joe, Connie protested, you can't seriously be entertaining this idea. Instead of immediately deferring to her objection, as I expected, Joe continued reading, then looked up at his daughter with an expression I hadn't seen him direct toward any family member in years. Genuine respect. You've put real thought into this, he acknowledged. The academic plan is sound, but there are many other considerations. Financial, logistical, social. I know, Candace agreed. I'm not asking for an immediate yes, just for you to truly consider it instead of automatically rejecting anything that doesn't fit your established plan for my life. The directness of this critique clearly struck home. Connie's expression shifted from dismissal to something more complicated. Wounded pride, mixed with dawning recognition that the child before her had changed in ways that couldn't be easily reversed or ignored. The twins, who had been following this exchange with wide-eyed attention, chose this moment to contribute their perspective. Candace is really happy here, Kevin offered. She smiles all the time now. At home, she's always in her room with the door closed. And she's super smart about plants and stars, Kimberly added loyally. She could be a real scientist someday. Their simple observations held a power that more elaborate arguments might have lacked. The unfiltered truth, as perceived by children who loved their sister and had witnessed her transformation firsthand. As the conversation continued, Connie raising practical objections, Candace calmly addressing each one, Joe asking increasingly thoughtful questions, I observed the subtle but significant shift occurring. What had begun as an impossible proposal was gradually being reframed as a challenging but potentially viable alternative path. The lesson I had prepared for Connie and Joe was being delivered not by me, but by their children, particularly by Candace, whose newfound clarity and purpose spoke more eloquently than any argument I could have constructed. The outcome remained uncertain. There would be many more discussions, compromises, and adjustments before any final decision. But as I watched my son engage genuinely with his daughter's vision for her future, asking about Gerald's mentorship possibilities, inquiring about college preparation within the independent study framework, I recognized that something fundamental had already been accomplished. My grandchildren had found something authentic in the forest, not just practical skills or nature appreciation, but a reconnection with their essential selves, unbuffered by screens and social performance. And in doing so, they had created the possibility of transformation not just for themselves, but for their parents as well. You know, Joe said during a pause in the conversation, looking around the cabin with new awareness. I haven't been up here since I helped Dad build the back porch extension. That was what, 20 years ago? 23, I corrected gently. The summer before you started business school. He nodded, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. I remember now. We spent that whole week working together. No phones, no interruptions. You were quite good with a hammer, I told him. Your father was very proud of what you built together. Something in his expression softened at this simple acknowledgement. Maybe, he began, then paused, seeming to reconsider his words. Maybe we could come up for weekends sometimes. All of us, not just drop the kids off, but actually stay, reconnect with this place. The suggestion, tentative as it was, represented a seismic shift from the man who had been too busy to visit his mother more than once a year for the past decade. Connie appeared startled by this unexpected alliance forming against her practical objections, but as she looked at her children's hopeful faces, something in her reflexive opposition wavered. We'll need to discuss this much more thoroughly, she said, though with less certainty than before. There are many factors to consider. Of course, I agreed, offering her a diplomatic bridge. Important decisions deserve careful consideration. As lunch concluded and the inevitable moment of departure approached, I observed the children's contrasting reactions. The twins gathered their few treasures with the resilience of their age, already contemplating how to incorporate their new knowledge into their regular lives. But Candace moved with deliberate slowness, her gathered specimens and journals carefully packed as if in preparation for a return rather than a departure. When the moment came to say goodbye, she embraced me with fierce intensity, whispering, "This isn't over, Grandma. I'm coming back, whatever it takes." I held her equally tightly, recognizing the steel in her voice that reminded me so much of myself at her age. The forest will be waiting, I assured her. As will I. As I watched the SUV disappear down my driveway, carrying my transformed grandchildren back to their urban existence, I felt not sadness, but a quiet satisfaction. The lessons I had prepared had taken root more deeply than I could have hoped, particularly in Candace, whose life trajectory had been visibly altered by our time together. Whether she returned for a weekend, a summer, or a more extended stay remained to be seen. But something essential had been awakened in her that would not easily be suppressed by a return to suburban routines and expectations. I settled into my porch rocker as evening approached, the forest reclaiming its peaceful rhythms around me. The cabin felt larger in the children's absence, but not empty. Their energy lingered in the spaces they had occupied, in the projects they had created, in the subtle ways they had left their mark on my solitary domain. "Well," I said to the cardinal pair now settled in their usual evening perch nearby, "that's a lesson they won't soon forget." The response came not from the birds, but from within me, a quiet certainty that what had transpired these past 2 weeks was exactly what both my grandchildren and their parents had needed. Though none of them had known it when Connie casually announced, "You're at loose ends anyway. You can watch them while we travel." Far from being at loose ends, I had been precisely where I needed to be, prepared to offer a lesson in living that no classroom could provide. And while Connie might never fully appreciate what had transpired during their absence, the seeds planted in her children would continue growing, creating possibilities she had never imagined for them. Sometimes, I reflected as darkness settled around my cabin, the most powerful teaching happens when we appear to be doing nothing at all. Thank you for listening. Please leave a comment with a rating from 0 to 10 for this story, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel.